Welcome to our embryology body cavity lecture. All right. So if we get into the body is going to have three body cavities ventrally. You're going to have a pericardial cavity that is going to be formed by your pleural pericardial membranes, forming a space where your heart is going to be found. You're going to have your pleural cavity that is going to be formed by the parietal and the visceral pleura. That's where you're going to find your lungs. And then you're going to have your abdominal cavity, or let me say your peritoneal cavity, where you're going to have a space where the abdominal viscera are going to be suspended into this peritoneal cavity. So here we want to talk about how these cavities are going to develop and how are they going to be separated into compartments, because these cavities in um, postnatal um, in postnatal or postnatally, they are divided, they are compartmentalized, they are not continuous. So let's get into it, guys. Right. So you're going to have, this is a cross section, right? Let's say we have cut at this position and we're going to look at this plane. You're going to find that this is going to be your ectoderm in its early stage of neurulation. You can actually now see this is the neural groove, and you can actually appreciate some neural folds here with some neural crest, remember. Right. And this is going to be your mesoderm that is going to be differentiated into three. And this mesoderm is very important in the formation of body cavities. So you're going to have this notochord right here, and it is the notochord and the neural tube that is going to initiate the differentiation of the mesoderm into the paraaxial mesoderm that is going to form your somatomere in the head and somites, right, in the body. And then you're going to have your, so these somites, they're going to form your dermatomes, your sclerotomes, your myotomes, right? And then you're going to have an intermediate, just lateral to the paraaxial mesoderm, an intermediate mesoderm. This one is going to form your urogenital system, your urogenital system, your urinary system, your reproductive system. They all come from the intermediate. We're going to look at it very soon. And then you're going to have this lateral plate mesoderm, which is very important in body cavity formation. So you're going to have formation of what you call coelomic spaces in the lateral plate mesoderm, right? Splitting the lateral plate mesoderm sort of like into two, right? So you can actually now see these what you call intra-embryonic coelom, or just intra-embryonic cavities, right? They will start to be just small, and then they're going to coalesce and join, and then actually divide this lateral plate mesoderm into two. So the primordium of the body cavity begins as an isolated coelomic space. So you can actually see this is going to be horseshoe shaped. You can actually see, right? It's going to be horseshoe shaped if you're going to look at it at this plane, right? This is going to be your coelom, and then the region that is going to be cranial to the oro orofa or let me say, or your your buccopharyngeal membrane. Yeah, that region, or that is going to be cranial to septum transversum portion, the one that is going to form your pericardial coelom. You understand? So you can actually see even these spaces, and then they are going to coalesce, and just form sort of like a space, a horseshoe-shaped space or horseshoe-shaped cavity. So the primordia of the body begins as isolated histologic spaces in the lateral plate mesoderm, right, and your cardiogenic area, which coalesce to form a single horseshoe-shaped cavity that is going to communicate laterally with the extra embryonic cavity. We're going to see it later. That's when this is completely separated, it's going to communicate the space, the 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 intra-embryonic space is going to communicate with the extra embryonic cavity. Right, so let's just dive into a little bit of a recap. Right, so the intraembryonic coelom can be understood by imagining a horseshoe of cavity placed within the mesoderm of the embryo. Remember, this is happening right inside the lateral plate mesoderm, right? That is being that is being separated. So remember, starting from this is gonna be your notochord. Let's start. This is gonna be your paraexomesoderm, the one that we said forms the skeleton, myotomes, and dermatomes, right? And this is gonna be your intermediate mesoderm. That's going to form your genital system, right? Right. And then this one definitely is going to be now your lateral plate mesoderm. So your lateral plate mesoderm is going to now be separated by those intraembryonic cavities that is going to coalesce, right? And then you can actually now see this is going to be your intraembryonic coelom. The intraembryonic coelom is going to initially is going to communicate with your extra embryonic coelom. So this space is going to communicate with the outside space. You can actually see it, right. So the lateral plate mesoderm is later going to be uh, um, is going to be divided into two. The part that's going to overline the ectoderm, right? This part, this part, right? This part is going to be called your somatopleuric layer or your parietal layer. So your parietal layer and your that is going to be your somatopleuric layer. This part that's going to line your endoderm is going to be called your splagnopubic layer or your visceral layer. You can actually see it, right? Good. So this is going to be your ectoderm. This is going to be your ectoderm. This is going to be your endoderm. This is going to be your mesoderm. You understand? Right. So you have to understand this, that the body cavities are formed by what we call folding, embryonic folding. So we have two types of folding. We have, and these foldings, they happen, they start to occur at the end of third week. So body cavities, they are going to be formed at the end of third week, right? Good. So at the end of the third week, that's where we're going to have the formation of body cavities. So it's going to be formed by what we call lateral folding and craniocaudal folding. So this one we see here, this called lateral folding, right? You can see that it is folding laterally and then it's going to join medially. So this was called lateral folding, right? So you can actually now see that this was your lateral plate mesoderm that had been separated by those intra-embryonic coelom. So after it is separated, this that lines the ectoderm is gonna be your somatopleuric layer or your parietal layer, and then this one covering your endoderm is gonna be your splagnopubic mesoderm or your visceral mesoderm, right? So the splagnopubic mesoderm to start to constrict while the somatopleuric mesoderm it will start to expand laterally going to the midline, right? So you can actually see these arrows actually bringing the amniotic fluid to surround the embryo. Remember the amniotic cavity was sitting on top of the ectoderm now. Remember? But now we want the amniotic fluid to actually surround the whole embryo. So you can now see this parietal layer stretching to move to the ventral, right? So initially, there's going to be a communication, right, between the midgut. We're going to talk about the midgut and the yolk sac. That communication is going to be called your vitelline duct, your vitelline duct, or your omphalloenteric duct. Very important. It's just going to be a constriction, right? And then later, this a portion of it is going to form the umbilical cord together with the allantois, right? So what is important, you can now actually see that this we have actually separated um, the what the parietal layer, right? Your parietal layer and your your visceral layer. So then we're going to have this space right here. This space is going to be very important because it's the one that's going to form your cavities. That is what we call the intra-embryonic cavity. The intra-embryonic cavity, right? So the spinal cord and the somi stimulates are the ones that are going to stimulate what you call lateral folding, which causes incorporation of another portion of the yolk sac from the midgut, right? You can actually see this is going to be your midgut, and then another portion is going to be incorporated, right? And the ventrolateral body walls of the embryo are formed. You can actually now see these walls, right, being formed, right? Connecting with the yolk sac is reduced to yolk stalk, this one. So you now have this yolk stalk, which you said is also called an omphalloenteric duct or your vitelline duct, which is the side that's going to form the what? The future umbilicus. Right, so we can actually see that this right here is going to be your yolk sac, this is going to be your midgut. So in yellow, that's your endoderm, and your endoderm is going to be divided into three: a foregut, midgut, and midgut, right? Very important. And then, so you're going to have what you call cranial caudal folding. So cranial caudal folding, you're going to have the cranial portion and the caudal portion sort of like going towards one another. You can actually now see these arrows, right? And these arrows. So remember, this also happening as the lateral folding is also taking place. So you have cranial caudal folding and lateral folding. This is lateral folding. So while we are laterally folding, we are also going to fold cranial caudally. This is very important because cranial caudal folding is gonna help us to reposition the heart. Because remember, the heart will be cranial to the oral to the back back of pharyngeal membrane. So then, due to this cephalocordial folding, the heart is gonna be at its original site. So you're gonna actually see, and then this also helps the the heart to be located within its cavity. So you can actually now see this cavity. That's your pericardial cavity. You can actually see it, right? That your heart is now located in your pericardial cavity. Right. So the intraembryonic cavity can be divided into, like I said, into pericardial cavity. So this becomes your pericardial cavity. actually see the development of your heart. This is your heart tube, and this is your septum transversum that's going to form your diaphragm and some connective tissue um, of your what of your liver. Um, so this pericardial cavity is going to be formed from the intraembryonic cavity. So it can be divided into pericardial cavity, right? And then we are going to have what you call, right? We are going to have what you call the pericardio peritoneal canals. Pericardio peritoneal canals. So if we have a section, if we cut at this level, you're gonna look at this, and then you're gonna see that there are gonna be spaces, right, at the side of your foregut that are called pericardial peritoneal canals. So these pericardial peritoneal canals, they are very important because they allow communication between your parietal cavity and your pericardial cavity. So remember, these spaces, these cavities are still in communication, right? And then we are going to have the development of the lungs as well as the development of the diaphragm that are going to separate these the intraembryonic cavity into three cavities: the pericardial cavity, the pleural cavity, and the peritoneal cavity. Right. So the pericardial peritoneal canals are lateral to the foregut, right? But dorsal to the what? To the septum transversum. So you can actually see that um this is your developing lungs, this is your foregut, and then lateral to the foregut you have these pericardial peritoneal canals. So the future of the heart occupies the pericardial cavity. The lungs will occupy the pericardial peritoneal canals, forming the pleural cavity, and then the contents of the gut occupy the peritoneal cavity. You understand? Those are the three cavities we have. Right. So let's talk about um, the the septum transversum, right? So, or the movement of the heart from its cephalic initial place to the original place. So you can actually see this is your developing brain. This is what you call your oropharyngeal membrane, or your buccopharyngeal membrane, which is going to form your mouth. And then now you're going to have your heart here and your pericardial cavity. So initially your heart will be cranial to your mouth. Funny, right? Uh-huh. But due to the development of the heart, of the brain, which is your forebrain, via what you call uh, cephalocordial folding. So this is going to develop. As it develops, it's going to push the heart, the primordial of the heart, as well as the pericardial cavity. You can actually see, and then it's gonna now shift to its original position. You can now see it shifting, and you can now actually appreciate that the oropharyngeal membrane is now cephalic to your to the primordial of the heart that which we find in the normal human being. You get your mouth, right? This is stomodium, is the is will form the opening of the mouth later. So you can actually now see that your mouth has to be cranial to your heart, right? So what is going to happen is this: you actually appreciate that this is your heart tube, right, in the pericardial cavity, right? And this arrow is referring to those canals. Remember those canals, the ones that I showed you. They will be communicating. They are called the pericardial peritoneal canals because they allow communication between the pericardial cavity and the peritoneal cavity. That's why they are called pericardial peritoneal canals. Right? You can actually appreciate them, right? Just right here. So you're going to have a tissue called septum transversum. So septum transversum is going to be a tissue that is going to separate your pericardial cavity from your peritoneal cavity, or just from your vitelline duct. You understand? Ventrally. Uh-huh. So another thing, um, so this is a cross section at B. So a cross section at B, you can actually see that this is your heart in your pericardial cavity. Those are the pericardial peritoneal canals. Remember them, right? Good. And then a section at C, you can actually now see that these are your peritoneal cavity. That's your peritoneal cavity, right? Surrounding your abdominal viscera, your liver, your stomach, and so forth, right? And you can actually appreciate here that the heart is going to be suspended by what we call a dorsal mesocardium, and the gut tube is going to be suspended from the posterior body wall by what we call a dorsal mesentery. It's also very important. So you can actually see this dorsal mesentery here. This is your gut, midgut being suspended to your posterior body wall by a dorsal mesentery. So yeah, so you're going to have your foregut. Your foregut is going to have a dorsal mesentery as well as a ventral mesentery. So take note of this, that the dorsal mesentery suspends the gut tube from the posterior body wall, and then it extends from the caudal tip of the foregut to the hindgut. And then the ventral mesentery, it extends only from the caudal limit of the foregut and to the upper part of the duodenum. This is going to make sense more when we are going to do the embryology of the GIT. But for today, you just have to understand that we have a dorsal mesentery, and then we can also have a ventral mesentery right here. And the ventral mesentery is going to extend from the caudal limit of the foregut to the upper part of the duodenum. So, what is a mesentery? Maybe you don't know what a mesentery is. What is a mesentery? So, mesentery is just a double layer of peritoneum that provides pathway for blood vessels, nerves, and lymphatics to organs. Right. So, right inside your mesentery, that's where you're going to have your neurovascular structures as well as your lymphatic vessels, right? Supplying your abdominal organs and so forth. So separation of cavities. Now let's go to the business again. So now, so you first separate the plu the pericardial cavity from the pleural cavity. So you can actually see, sorry, you can actually see this is your heart inside your pericardial cavity. And the pericardial cavity initially is in communication with the pleural cavity. So this is your pleural cavity. It has to be separated from the pericardial cavity. So you're going to have the development of the lungs. As the lungs are developing, remember the lungs, they develop from as a lung diverticulum from the ventral part of the foregut, remember, and then they are going to grow ventrally, laterally, and caudally. So as they are growing, they are going to push, right, what you call the peritoneal folds to the midline. So this is going to be a pleural peritoneal fold. We want to separate this space from this place. So as these lungs are growing laterally, we're going to push these pleural pericardial folds medially, and when they fuse, they form what's called pleural pericardial membrane. Take note of this. Inside the pleural pericardial folds or a membrane, you're going to have these structures. You're going to have a right and left common cardinal vein, and you're going to have the right and left phrenic nerves. And it is this pleural pericardial fold that is going to form your fibrous pericardium surrounding your heart. And take note of this, the left common cardinal vein is going to regress, right? Due to in the heart, you're going to discover that the left horn of the sinus venosus is going to obliterate, right? And then also you're going to have the regression of the left common cardinal vein. So the one that is going to persist is going to be your right common cardinal vein. You understand? Very important. So when the lung primordia, which is the bronchial buds, grow from the foregut into the pericardial peritoneal canals, right? A pair of folds, these are the pair of folds, this one and this one, that will later become membranes when they fuse, right? The folds are called the pleural pericardial folds, right? So these pleural pericardial folds, they are going to fuse, separating your pericardial cavity and your pleural cavity. And they're also going to bring the right common cardinal vein to the midline, right? And they are going to form your fibrous pericardium. So you can actually now see that this is your septum transversum, and above the septum transversum, this is going to be your pericardial space. Below it, you're going to have your vitelline duct. Remember your vitelline duct, or your omphaloenteric duct, that will later become your umbilicus. Remember, at the other side of the foregut, you have these canals. You can actually see these canals. These are your pleuropericardial, pleural. These are going to be your pericardial peritoneal canals. And now we are separating the pericardial space from the pleural space by the pleural pericardial folds that will fuse and form membranes. Let's take a look a bit of these pleural pericardial membranes. I've already spoken much of it. So as the lung bud grows, you can actually see this is your lung, this is your lung, right? At first, the you can actually see these pleural pericardial folds, they are separated, right? And as the lung begins to grow, right, you can actually see these pleural pericardial folds rushing to the midline to fuse, and then now they have fused and we have completely separated. This is your pericardial cavity, this is going to be your pleural cavity. But we are also going to have your right common cardinal vein, right? Your right common cardinal vein, the left one is going to regress. The right common cardinal vein is going to form your inferior vena cava. You can actually see your inferior vena cava. And then you're going to have your left and right phrenic what? Nerves. And then this one is going to form your fibrous pericardium. Right. So later the medial ends of this membrane, they fuse with the ventral mesentery also focus, thus completely separating the pleural cavity from the pericardial cavity. Yes. Right. What are the contents of the pleural pericardial membranes? We spoke of the phrenic nerves, the common cardinal veins that will initially that would be right, forming the inferior vena cava. Done. Right. And then taking note of this, these pleural pericardial membranes, they are later going to form your fibrous pericardium. So let's us take a look. So gross anatomically, uh, all right. So this is gonna be your sternum, right? Your ribs. They should have removed this, but well, we can actually appreciate that this is This is going to be your fibrous pericardium surrounding your heart. And then you're going to have these phrenic nerves, the right and left phrenic nerves. You can actually see them, right? Exactly. Very important and very clear. So these are the phrenic nerve right here and right here embryologically coming from the pleural pericardial membranes. So since later the pleural pericardial membrane become fibrous pericardium, the phrenic nerves are found on them in adults. Now, let's now talk about what we call the pleural peritoneal membranes. So take note of this. We have three body cavities: pericardial cavity, pleural cavity, and peritoneal cavity. Initially, the pericardial cavity is continuous with the pleural pericardial cavity, and they are going to be separated by the pericardial. They are going to be separated by the pleural pericardial folds that will form the membranes. Remember, so these are going to separate the pericardial and the pleural cavity, right? But the pleural cavity is still in communication with the parietal cavity. So the peritoneal cavity is still in communication with the pleural cavity. So we now need to separate the pleural cavity from the peritoneal cavity. Lungs, they should be on their own, and then the abdominal viscera on their. So how? So you're going to have folds again that are called the pleural peritoneal folds. So these pleural peritoneal folds, they are gonna close those pericardial peritoneal canals, right? So the pleural peritoneal membranes are attached dorsolaterally to the posterior abdominal wall, and they are going to extend. So you can actually see these are your pleural peritoneal folds, right? This is a space that is called the pericardial peritoneal canals, right? That's going to facilitate what? The communication of the peritoneal cavity and the cavity. So you're going to have the growth of these pleural peritoneal folds, right? So they're going to extend ventromedially, fusing with the mesentery of the esophagus. Remember, we spoke of the mesentery, right? Which is the dorsal mesentery of the esophagus, as well as the septum transversum. So it's going to fuse with the septum transversum ventrally and the dorsal mesentery medially, whilst closing the pleural, the pericardial peritoneal canals, right? So this is going to take part in the formation of your diaphragm. So now let's get into the formation of the diaphragm. So the diaphragm, you just have to take note of this, that it is formed from four, it originates or is formed by four tissues. All right. So it has four origins. We have the septum transversum that is going to form your central tendon, right? You're going to have your pleural peritoneal membranes, those that we just mentioned earlier. These are going to form sort of like the peripheral part of your diaphragm. You're going to have your mesentery of the esophagus that is going to form the crura, right? Remember, your diaphragm is right crura and left crura, right? And then you're going to have the muscular ingrowth coming from the myoblast from C3 to C5. That's why the diaphragm is innervated by a phrenic nerve that comes from C3 to C5 because it receives myoblast from C3 to C5. So yeah, so the septum transversum is first identified at the third week cranial to the pericardial cavity. Remember, I mentioned this, right? And then as the embryo is what folding, right, it will later lie between the pericardial cavity, right, and the peritoneal cavity. So that's what the septum transversum is separates the pericardial cavity and the peritoneal cavity, right? but it does not completely separate. It leaves those gaps that we say are your pericardial peritoneal canals at the other side. Those gaps, remember, that are being closed by the pleural peritoneal membrane. Right. So the second transition of is right. So let's take a look here. So the pleural peritoneal membranes, if they expand ventromedially, they fuse with the mesentery of the esophagus as well as the septum transversum, forming no part a part of the diaphragm. Right. So these pleural peritoneal membranes later contribute a small portion to the diaphragm, and then the esophagus mesentery is going to form the pleural of the diaphragm, and the septum transversum is going to form the central tendon of the diaphragm, right? That's why the central tendon of the diaphragm is also going to be innervated by the phrenic nerve, right? Remember, um, sen- sensory innervation, right? And then the muscular ingrowth forms the peripheral part, right? So that's also you also have the phrenic nerve only giving motor innervation because these muscular ingrowth they are coming from C3, C5. So this is your septum transversum, the septum tendon, this is your crura, this is your pleural peritoneal membrane, and then you're going to have these muscular ingrowth coming from C3, C5, right? So yeah, you can actually see the diaphragm is actually separated our body into three. The pleural cavity, another pleural cavity, peritoneal cavity, pericardial cavity. This is the cavity. So now you have three spaces, right? So this is what forms the diaphragm, the septum transversum, mesentery of the esophagus, pleural peritoneal folds in the membrane, muscular ingrowth, the body wall C3 to C5. Right, so let's now get to the clinical correlates of the development of body cavities. So you're going to have what you call ectopia cordis. So ectopia cordis is okay when the lateral body wall line in the thoracic region, causing their heart to protrude outside. So you have incomplete fusion of this body wall, lateral body wall, causing their heart to protrude outside. Two, country pantology. So country pantology is a combination of deformities, five deformities. That's why it's called pentology. Five. So you're going to have the following. You're going to have ectopia cordis being included. You're going to have the anterior portion of the diaphragm, the defect of the anterior portion of the diaphragm, absence of the pericardium, defect in the sternum, and abdominal wall. It can also include gastroschisis and omphalocele. Right. What about gastroschisis? Gastroschisis. So gastroschisis is the failure of body wall closure in the abdominal region, causing intestinal loop to sort of like directly into your amniotic cavity. So therefore, you have taken note of this. In gastroschisis, you have direct communication of the irritated intestinal loop by, with the what? Amniotic cavity, of the amniotic fluid, right? And this one is not associated with any chromosomal abnormality. We also have bladder and cloacal extrophy. Bladder and cloacal extrophy, bladder, we are just talking about abnormal body wall closure in the pelvic region, right? And usually this one, right, in male is going to be associated with what you call epispadias. So epispadias is just a split in the dorsal portion of the what of the penis, right? And taking note of this, in cloacal extrophy, you have you have the bladder and the rectum being exposed, right? And then we go to omphalocele. Omphalocele is a bit similar to gastroschisis, but they actually so you also have herniation of loops, right? So you remember normally you have loops in your in your peritoneal cavity. They'll undergo what's called physiological herniation due because there will be a lot of pressure inside the abdomen, so they herniate into the umbilical cord, right? And then after some time, they are going to they are going to retract back into the abdominal cavity. So failure of the retraction of those herniated intestinal loops is going to be called omphalocele. So these intestinal loops, they do not directly communicate with the amniotic fluid as in gastroschisis, but they are separated by a sac of the umbilical cord. Take note of this, omphalocele is more severe than gastroschisis because it involves chromosomal defects, about 15% of chromosomal defects, right? So it's more severe. Good. And then we have also congenital diaphragmatic hernia. So what is happening here is this. So remember, you're going to have your pericardial peritoneal canals, but they have to be separated by the pleural peritoneal membranes, both of them. So failure of the closing of these pleural peritoneal membranes, right, in an adult is gonna cause. So you're going to have communication of the peritoneal cavity with the pleural cavity due to failure of one of the pleuroperitoneal membranes. So the congenital diaphragmatic hernia, it mainly occurs to the left. About 85 to 90% it occurs to the left. So you're gonna see uh, abdominal viscera in the chest, pushing the heart anterior and compressing the lungs. So it is associated with the hypoplasia of the lungs. And then the last one, you're going to have esophageal hernia. So esophageal hernia is due to the congenital shortness of the esophagus, failure of the lengthening of the esophagus, that's going to cause the stomach to be pulled, right, and to be constricted at the level of the diaphragm. So if you remember very well that the esophagus is going to pierce the diaphragm via what you call the esophageal hiatus, that's going to be surrounded by the right crus. So if there is shortening of the esophagus, you have your stomach at that position, leading to constriction of your stomach. So hi guys, thank you so much for listening to this audio. Thank you so much for listening to this video. See you in our next lecture.